Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another daily devotion, bringing another week to a close. The weeks fly in. As you get older, they seem to go even quicker. We're returning to Psalm 24 this morning. And as we saw in our study on Wednesday, the occasion behind the writing of this psalm was probably the ark being returned once again to the tabernacle in Jerusalem. And so, picture the scene. The ark is being carried in a great procession of joy and praise up towards Jerusalem to go into the tabernacle. God is among his people once again. That's how the Israelites would have seen it. Being brought from Obed-Edom's house and now right at the centre once again of the life of the nation. But then the question arises, who can enter into the presence of the Lord? Who can stand before God and have fellowship with him and worship? Verse 3 asks that question. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand in his holy place? The people knew God was holy, and therefore they need to know who can approach him. The psalmist gives the answer in verse 4. The person who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to vanity, in other words, to what is false, nor sworn deceitfully. In other words, the psalmist says there are certain moral characteristics that have to be considered and fulfilled before you can truly enter the presence of God. Only certain people can come before God and enjoy fellowship with him in worship. Now, clearly what is stated here in this psalm is not a full catalogue. It's not a full list of the requirements for fulfilling true worship and fellowship with God. What the psalmist is doing here, he is saying here are a few of the sort of qualities that a true worshipper possesses. And only in possessing these sorts of things can one come into the presence of God. These are the things you will see in a man or a woman's life. It's similar to Psalm 15, where we have a list of the more obvious spiritual and moral qualities that are required of those who worship God. So he speaks here about clean hands. In other words, a life that is free from obvious, foul, evil, sinful deeds. But the requirements go deeper than the externals of life, and so he moves from clean hands to a pure heart. The person's heart has to be pure before God. And then the psalmist mentions he doesn't lift up his soul to what is false or to vanity. It means he doesn't take delight in what is false. But also, sometimes in Scripture, the phrase what is vain or false refers to false gods. In other words, this person who's coming before God must have no other gods in their life. So in short, there has to be purity, there has to be sincerity, there has to be obvious holiness, and there has to be exclusive devotion to God. Such a person can enter into the presence of God. He also says he does not swear deceitfully. It's a man or a woman whose word can be trusted. They have a sincere reverence for things that are holy. Now, brethren, none of us possess such qualities by nature. And even by grace, we do not possess these things perfectly. Does that mean that we can't come into the presence of God? Does that mean that we cannot worship God? No, of course not. Because just as the Jews had the high priest to represent them, so too we have our great high priest. one who fulfills all the requisite qualities, all the requisite demands to come into the presence of God. Jesus is our high priest, and he has given us his righteousness, and clothed in his righteousness, we can come into the presence of God. However, we must come with sincerity. We must come with no known, unconfessed sin in our lives. Pure hands, a clean heart. We must not allow anyone or anything else to take preeminence in our lives. We do not lift up our hearts unto vanity. We must be people who guard our tongue. We do not swear deceitfully. Our lives are to give to God that worship that is due to him alone. Only in such a spirit, with such a life, can we know true worship and fellowship with God. And how appropriate it is that we think about these things on a Friday morning. The Sabbath day is coming. Let us come into the presence of God. Let us worship him, clothed in the righteousness of Christ, and having nothing in our lives that would keep us from worshipping him in spirit and in truth. I trust you'll have a good day today, a blessed weekend, and a fruitful Sabbath day's worship. See you next week. God bless.